check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome to Game Changer by Powerhouse Coaching, your podcast to master the mental game, elevate your brilliance, and build a legacy of progress and impact. My name is Amanda Escobedo. I'm your host and inner game coach here to help you change the game. Welcome to episode 18. We're going to dive right into our episode today. Last week, we introduced you to the results model. And in the results model, we did a little education around how your circumstances trigger thoughts. And it's your thoughts that drive feelings, the emotions, the vibrations in your body, the good vibes, and the ones you don't like to feel. Those feelings are what drive your action or inaction, and it's your action or inaction that gets you your results, the outcome. And so with all that to say, circumstances are not actually what get you your outcome. It's how you think about your circumstances. And so if there's one big takeaway, again, from this model is I want to invite you to this perspective that I just shared is that your circumstances do not determine your outcome, rather how you think about those circumstances. And the story you apply to those circumstances are what ultimately drive your results. And so if you missed that episode, it's a great foundation for understanding mindset work in a very, very practical way. And honestly, when I break down my role as a coach for you, as simple as it sounds, I like to think of myself as a thought upgrader because transformation isn't just about changing behaviors. It's not even about changing your thoughts. It's really about transforming your belief system. And then often from there, that next tier is really transforming your identity. But part of transforming your belief system, part of transforming your identity, we are looking to upgrade that software in your brain that produces some of those thoughts, those itty bitty critty thoughts. And at the foundation of all the mindset work in upgrading how we think. That's a little bit of what we talked about last episode. And today we're going to go a little deeper, one layer deeper. Because if your thoughts are what drive your outcome, then the real question becomes, where do our thoughts come from? And we talked a little bit about this last week where our thoughts can be triggered by circumstances. They could just be like simply thought consciously. They could also just come out of nowhere. But certain thoughts, what I want to highlight, feel so automatic for us, right? And when I say automatic, it feels like some of these thoughts are true and just unquestionable. Nobody can question these thoughts. These thoughts are accurate. And that's what we're actually going to be talking about today. Paradigms, actually, to be exact. This whole episode is about paradigms. And a paradigm, for your awareness, is a set of beliefs. A set of beliefs that function like your operating system in your mind. It's how you see the world. It's what we assume to be true. And it's the lens your brain uses to interpret everything. It's how you interpret people. It's how you interpret leadership. It's how you interpret business, change, talent, performance, and even yourself. And here's the key part. Most of us don't even realize we have a bunch of paradigms going on in our mind. Because when you're inside a paradigm, it doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like this is just how it is. Paradigms are what shape the narratives we automatically apply to circumstances. And those narratives, again, are what shape how we feel. They're what shape how we respond to things, what we do next, and ultimately what we create. Now, a paradigm, again, is a set of belief systems. It's a set of belief systems about who we are, how people work, what's possible. It's a set of belief systems about what we believe is risky and what things mean. So even when someone can maybe articulate a belief, they can tell you, well, I believe, that doesn't actually mean they're consciously engaged in this belief system or any of their belief systems all day. Most of the time, it's simply just running in the background. And so when something happens, circumstance, as an example, let's say somebody cuts you off on the freeway. We don't meet that behavior or that circumstance neutrally. It's our belief system that quietly answers questions like, what does this mean? Is it about me? Is this a threat or an opportunity? And that's where the story starts to form, right? So, what I'm trying to say again, if we are saying paradigms are a set of belief systems, your belief systems are what produce the narratives, the story you tell yourself, the frequent story that you tell yourself. So, examples that you might recognize could include, this always happens to me. I must have done something wrong. People don't respect my time. I'm falling behind. These narratives are rarely chosen by us. They're applied. They're applied narratives from your paradigms. And so if you're trying to change your outcome without changing the paradigm underneath, it's like trying to run a new software on an old operating system. It might work just for a moment, but eventually you're going to snap back. And that's why change can feel very hard for some people, even when you know what to do, right? Information is not enough to drive action. A paradigm shift tends to happen when a belief you thought was a reality starts to break, it starts to crack. It started to show and surface some other ways of thinking or possibilities. And so it's not just about, let me just change my thought process and change how I think about it. You can do that, but often it's changing the lens that creates those thoughts. Again, when we say change the lens, change the paradigm, change the belief system that produced that narrative for you. And again, that's where that paradigm shift can feel so powerful for us. And honestly, when they're so powerful, it's because they happen really fast. A lot of the time, a paradigm shift happens in a moment for us. It's that realization of, I've been seeing this wrong the entire time. It's almost like stepping out of a room and realizing you've been wearing tinted glasses your whole life and you had no idea. Paradigm shifts usually happen when your current belief system can't fully explain something anymore. And there are a few common ways this can actually show up for yourself. So, one is a new perspective. So, sometimes it's another person. Maybe you have a coach, maybe you have a mentor, a leader, maybe it's just a conversation with somebody or even a podcast as such. So, one of these things, a coach, a mentor, a leader, a conversation with somebody, or a podcast, you hear something, it's that thing that invites you into a different way of seeing something. So, that coach or mentor or leader might say, what if this isn't happening to you, but what if it's happening for you? Or what if resistance isn't the problem? What if it's lack of information? Or what if the thing you think is slowing you down is actually showing you what needs to change? Now, if your mind is open enough to just sit with that perspective, a new paradigm then becomes possible. And so, a second way, as an example, to potentially have a paradigm shift is through a personal experience. So sometimes life hands you an experience that directly contradicts what you've believed to be true your whole life. You've believed hard work always leads to reward, or good performers don't get let go, or if you do everything right, things will work out for you. And then something happens. Something happens that doesn't quite fit that story anymore. That internal tension between what you believed and what you experienced is often where paradigms begin to break. So, example, if we go back to, you believed good performers don't get let go. Let's say you're a leader and you've been been a part of terminations. You've always been partnering with HR. You're like, this person isn't performing. We got to let them go. Let's say you've been a part of rifts, and in your strategy in partnering with HR, part of your layoff strategy was, we got to let go of the worst performers, right? So the narrative in your head has always been, top performers never get let go. It's always the low performer. And then one day you either get fired or you get laid off. And now your paradigm has completely broken, because how you see yourself is a high performer. How you see yourself as someone that goes above and beyond. How you see yourself maybe is someone with clarity, direction, strategy. And so maybe in this experience for you, new thoughts start to surface. Well, this was poor leadership. This was favoritism. This was this was that. And so your brain is starting to see what your experience. Maybe you were having friction with your leader, whatever that is. So your brain is starting to finally recognize, wow, maybe it's not just top performers that or low performers that get let go. And that personal experience is starting to open your mind up to not be so judgmental on people that may have a layoff on their resume or that someone that you know that may have gotten fired. Now, another way to potentially have a paradigm shift is by a new environment. So sometimes it's, again, not one moment. It can be in a moment, but sometimes it's emerging you into something new. And that could look like joining a new company, that could be joining a new culture, a new team, joining a new relationship. And within that newness, you realize leadership looks different. People communicate differently here. What I thought was normal isn't universal. And so maybe if you think of politics today. Politics are a very hot topic. We've been very divided. In the beginning phases of COVID and everything that was going on in the political world, it felt like for a very long time there was only one way of thinking. And if you didn't think that way, then you were either a bad person or you were a good person. And now, as things have evolved, let's say you've relocated, you're no longer surrounded in that neighborhood with that certain group of people that think a certain way, and you've moved across the country and they have a completely different culture and a completely different way of thinking. And for the first time, you're hearing a lot new and different perspectives that you had never thought before. And now, potentially your political beliefs have shifted in that process, right? Or let's say you were working at a startup and you were in the hustle and the bustle, and now you're working in a large corporation. And now you're seeing things move a little differently. Whereas before, maybe there was a lot more reward of moving fast. And in the large corporation, it's less about moving fast because if you've ever worked in a startup versus a corporation, when you're trying to make change, it feels like you're shifting the Titanic. So your way of, I'll say, change and impact starts to have to be in the direction of influence. And so within these are minimal examples of trying to show you how different ways of looking at things based on different experiences. And different experiences trigger different ways of thinking, which start to trigger your creativity. And as you've been listening for a while, we are eventually going to tie all of this back into creativity. But with these new environments, it starts to expose and quietly loosen old assumptions that you might have had. Another experience could be a crisis that you could have experienced. And sometimes pressure forces an update. So burnout, maybe it's a breakdown, health scare, career disruption, a major loss of something, a breakup. And it's these type of moments where the old lens simply just cannot survive the weight anymore. Not because you don't want to change, but because the old way of seeing no longer works. And I'll give you my own example. I don't know if I'd call it as strong as a crisis, and I'm going to be vulnerable with you all, but I went through a breakup. This is quite a few years ago, and I didn't realize at the time my paradigm. I lived in San Francisco and I had the mindset of dating sucks, dating is terrible, men suck. And I had this belief system, which again, I didn't quite realize at the time, but all men had red flags. That was my belief system, that all men had red flags. And if that's my belief system, then part of that shows that every challenge I'm going to or frustration I'm experiencing in the dating world makes it them as the problem, right? I'm never the problem because it's the men that always have the red flags. And the other thing, we'll have another episode on this, but what I want to say is your paradigms are so strong, they can actually create hallucinations in your brain. And a hallucination could look like, if I believe all men have red flags, then I'm starting to search for those behaviors. It's the only thing I'm starting to focus on. And even if there isn't, let's say, a red flag that's glaring at you, you'll start to interpret things that look yellow to orange, orange as red, because your brain wants to be right. Your brain is trying to protect you. And on the other side as well, what happens is your behaviors will start to generate and produce what you believe. So let's say I have a green flag in front of me, somebody that is actually pretty awesome. Because I live in a world where all men have red flags, my brain wants to make that true. I might start to produce self sabotaging behaviors that start to influence red flags from him, right? So I'm actually trying to create that outcome for myself because it's what I believe. And so it wasn't till I went through a relationship that lasted a while and we had a really bad breakup. I'll just leave it at that. And his response to that breakup really scared me. And that took me on a journey. I went on a journey of reflection for an entire year. I used to walk from my apartment to the Golden Gate Bridge every weekend. It's about 7 miles there and back by myself. And I would just reflect and reflect and reflect and think what went wrong because I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I just wanted to protect myself. And it was in that period of that time that all these insights started flooding in that I started to realize, well, I don't communicate. I'm a runner. I'm looking for things to go wrong. And all of these insights started to flood me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm the problem. That was a paradigm shift for. And so it was that breakup that really rocked my world. That breakup was something that shook me so much that I didn't want to repeat that outcome again. And it took me into this world of reflection and insights. And I had a new paradigm shift where now it's less about all men have red flags. The other thing, of course, like many women and many people suffer in relationships with is worthiness. If someone's not texting you back or calling you or pursuing you how you want to be pursued, then you're starting to just find evidence or interpret that behavior as they're just not that into you, which spirals into a worthiness issue. And new paradigms today is there's none of that for me. Now it's if I see behaviors that are not in alignment with what I need, I'm communicating. And the goal is it's more about alignment. And so I'm communicating and trying to see if there is alignment and synergy between me and this other person. And when we get to a point where I've communicated my needs, you have communicated back, I can't meet that. It's not because they're not that into me. It's not because I'm not worthy of that. It's like, thanks for sharing. We're not in alignment. Let's move on with our lives. So, again, another paradigm shift. These are completely different ways of thinking and seeing the world that now have my nervous system completely at ease. I'm completely grounded. Any anxiousness I might have had around dating has completely dissolved. I'm not going to say 100%. Every time you kind of have a new, unexpected experience, that's another thing that you have to work through. But bringing back to a crisis could be something, a disruption, a career disruption, that layoff we talk about. Let's say you go bankrupt within a business, right? It's these life experience. You had a health scare. I've gone through 3 open heart surgeries. There are definitely some insights that start to shape new paradigm shifts for you. Now, again, let's make it real. And I just kind of gave you a little bit of this example, but we're going to dive just a little deeper. So, again, I want to go back to this high performer layoff situation. And I want you to imagine yourself as a people leader. Let's say you are a people leader today. You're a first time engineering manager, you're a director. Let's say you're a founder, CEO, you have people reporting into you. And in your mind, maybe you've been in this position of power. In this position of power, you have been able to let go of what you perceive as poor performers. And so within that, and even you've shaped and seen your experience as an IC, an individual contributor, you've been frustrated from people that can't meet expectations. And then you've seen them disappear and you're like, oh, thank goodness. The people who get fired must be poor performers. So it's those experiences, those previous experiences that you've had that have potentially started to drive and develop and curate this paradigm, this belief system for you. And so if we bring it back to today, again, now imagine, let's say you were going through COVID and you were a part of like the many in the world, a layoff, right? Or let's say you are working as your own founder and you get fired from your own company by the board. And you know in your bones, again, that you're not a bad leader, you're not a bad employee. You know how to deliver results. You've been rated highly previously. You know how to make a result happen. You know how to put in the work. You're passionate. And so your mind has a problem with the fact that why would you be chosen for a layoff? Or how is it that you, the founder of your own company, could be fired by the board when you are the visionary? Now, because your paradigm says fired people equal bad people, but your experiences say, I'm not bad, I'm not a poor performer. It's that tension is where that paradigm starts to break down. And then suddenly, because that paradigm is now being cracked open, suddenly new possibilities start to appear. It could be there's a restructuring going on. It could be budget shifts. It could be leadership conflict. It could be a misalignment of some sort. It could be politics. It could be shifting priorities. It could be timing. And now you don't just have a new opinion from this experience, you have a new paradigm. And as a leader, everything starts to change once you have this new paradigm. When you have this new paradigm, instead of asking, what's wrong with them, or they're assuming there must be something wrong with them, you start to ask, I wonder what happened here. So if you have somebody coming in with a resume and there is a job gap, right, within their last job and their new job, and you talk it through, you find out they got laid off, or maybe someone was vulnerable and said, yeah, I got fired from that position. Now you're coming from a place of curiosity and you're saying, what happened here? What was the context that brought to that outcome? What support was maybe missing from this employee? What's the full story? That, my friends, is leadership. That is a paradigm driven by strong leadership. Now, let's bring these paradigms into tech teams and AI. So, a lot of leaders say, you might hear this narrative, my team is resistant to using AI. It's something I'm hearing very frequently right now. My team is resistant to AI. But the statement often reveals a paradigm. That statement reveals a paradigm. One of the most common ones that I see is if someone is resistant, that means they hate change. And if they hate change, that's just who they are, right? So we're speaking as though things are a matter of fact, as though they are truth. And it's that belief system that can have consequences for us because when resistance is seen as an identity of someone, that's just who they are. Leaders stop trying to understand why someone might be resistant. But what if resistance is not an identity? What if that behavior of resistance is actually data, is actually information? What if it reflects fear of losing relevance? What if that resistance reflects uncertainty about role evolution? What if that resistance is fear of looking incompetent or fear of being measured against a machine? In other words, what if the resistance is the critter brain trying to protect our value and has nothing to do with hating change? That's a completely different paradigm. And that paradigm changes what leaders do next. So some people have it and some people don't. This is another example of paradigm. I want to provide you with a few other examples. So other common leadership paradigms that you might hear that I've definitely heard, especially from an HR and a coaching perspective, is some people have it and just some people don't. And something like this, some people have it and some people don't. This leads to labeling, fixed thinking, and missed potential. Another common leadership paradigm you might have heard or said yourself is some people are coachable and just some people aren't. Discomfort gets misread as inability. I've seen this time and time again. Discomfort gets misread as inability. Risk taking shuts down, learning slows, and innovation fades. And so if you are someone that believes somebody is not coachable, then you're not even going to try and coach them out of that discomfort, right? You're not going to help them open up their risk taking and evolve their way of learning. And so if somebody just believes you're not coachable, then we all stop trying to develop that human. Some people are just resistant to change. As I mentioned, change becomes compliance driven instead of engagement driven. And AI requires engagement. So, some common leadership paradigms. Now, here's the reframe that I want to invite you to is that people are not fixed. People are not fixed. What do I mean by that? Time and time again, I constantly hear like people don't change. People just are who they are. If that were true, then I would definitely not have people would not pay me for transformation. People would not pay me to become different humans. People would not pay me to activate their human potential. No coach would exist, right? Transformation would not be a word in the dictionary if people were truly fixed. I'm a perfect example. I have transformed in my love life, I have transformed in my career, I have transformed in my finances. There are a lot of things that I've transformed, and all of that has had to transform by first transforming my thoughts, my beliefs, my paradigms. Behavior is data. What do I mean by that? This is another reframe I want to introduce you to. Going back to, so and so is resistant to using AI or so and so is just resistant. They are a resistant person rather than shaping their identity with that behavior. Use more that behavior as a data point. So if behavior is data, that means that's your opportunity to invite curiosity to understand what is driving that behavior. Because remember, feelings drive action or inaction, right? Resistance could be inaction. You're feeling something that is driving that, and there are thoughts that are fueling that feeling. And your job as a leader is to get curious to understand what is that person thinking that is fueling resistance. Going back into this example, resistance is just information, right? Resistance is just information. It's giving you information about how someone sees the world. And what I'm really saying is, again, it's another opportunity to get curious. And so leadership is your ability to turn friction into forward movement. When leaders believe that, they start to ask better questions. That's a paradigm I'm inviting you to think of, to actually adopt. Leadership is the ability to turn friction into forward movement. You've heard me talk a lot about how I specialize in cultivating creativity in business. And the way we define creativity is flow, where you're just flowing around through obstacles. We also talk about team flow, group flow. And what that means is every obstacle, you're just flowing around. And so, if you're the leader of an organization, if you're a leader of a team, that means you are influencing the flow. Any type of tension you're feeling, you yourself are inviting yourself and the team to get curious so that everything can be figure outable, solvable. So you're trying to understand what is the root of that friction and how do we solve for it so you continue to move forward in movement. And so when people start to see themselves in the future, they stop resisting. This is another paradigm I'm inviting you to believe in. When people see themselves in the future, they stop resisting. And what does that mean? If we go back to the resistance to AI, there's a possibility there that somebody, if we go back to the fear of losing value, fear of losing your job, fear of not being competent against a machine, right? If you can start to paint a picture of how someone lives in the future with AI, complementary with AI, on how they're elevated by AI, on how humanity is elevated when it's used right, then they may stop resisting to use AI because they see themselves elevated in the future. And so when you believe that, again, you stop to identify someone as just resistance, someone is just hating change, right? You're starting to understand the why behind their thinking process and you start to solve for that. And so here's a practice I want you to try this week. For this week, I want you to identify one belief system you hold about work, you hold about success, you hold about relationships, or even just life in general. Now, that could sound or look like, I don't have time to work out right now. That could be a belief, a paradigm. And let's actually remove the phrase right now. We can just say, I don't have time to work out. Like, that is just it. You want to work out. It's the new year. You have goals, but you're also an entrepreneur. You're a business owner, and there's a lot of different things that got to get done, and you're doing it all. And so, this is just the season of your life where you don't have time to work out. You don't have time. So let's say that is your paradigm or your belief system. Similar, let's say you're playing the game, I don't have time to date. I'll focus on that later. Or your paradigm, another complementary paradigm is if I slow down, I'll lose momentum, right? Or building something meaningful requires sacrificing just some things, and that's just my health right now. Or you can't have it all. Some things always have to give. So if you notice, these are examples of different paradigms that actually all feed into each other. And these belief systems often sound practical. So if you're talking to someone and they're like, oh, yeah, you're an entrepreneur. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things to do. For sure. Like, there's no way you're going to have time to work out or eat healthy or just all the things that you have to do. Yeah, you have limited time, so you can't. So these beliefs might sound very practical. Let's say you were late to a meeting. You're like, oh, there was traffic. And someone says, leave early. And you're like, I tried. So the traffic just gets worse. And then we're like, oh, okay. So we just give up on you showing up on time. That's another paradigm that I would invite you to challenge this week. These beliefs, again, they often sound super practical. They sound responsible or even justified sometimes, but they're all still just paradigms. They're belief systems that are just driving a story about that circumstance. And so inviting you to just think through, what do you believe? What's a paradigm you potentially hold? And your actions is one, to identify a paradigm, and two is to ask yourself three powerful questions. And the three powerful questions I want to challenge you with is, do I know this belief to be 100% true? How does holding this belief affect my energy? Am I energized? Do I feel motivated? Does it expand me or does it bring me down? Do I get frustrated with the world? Do I feel defeated? How does this belief system affect my energy? And then the third question I want to invite you to is, what might someone with a completely different perspective see here that I don't see yet? And when you're asking these questions and you're starting to get answers, I want you to check in with your body. Again, does this belief system energize me, or does it leave me tense, frustrated, or heavy? Paradigms don't just shape our behavior, they shape our internal state. And so here's what I want to leave you one last bit. Your paradigms are shaping your leadership today, whether you're conscious of it or not. Your paradigm is shaping your relationships. Your paradigm is shaping your health. Your paradigm is shaping your business. And when you shift and change your paradigms, your behaviors start to change. Your culture starts to change. Your results start to change. In the next episode, we're going to take this a little further on how paradigms spread through teams, on how leaders reinforce them unintentionally into the culture, and how to build environments where people evolve during change. That's all I've got for you folks. My name is Amanda Escobedo, and you've been listening to Game Changer. If this episode sparked any insights, ahas, or appreciations, new perspectives, I'd be so grateful if you subscribed and left a review and shared this episode with 3 people in your network who were ready to master the inner game and unlock their potential. Your support helps others discover this resource and invites them to be the next game changer. Join me next time on another conversation on leadership, culture, and creating impact that lasts. Thanks for listening.